So welcome back to another episode, and a very special episode it is. I am back with my friend Andrew. He is visiting for a few days. We thought we'd shoot a few videos. We thought we'd start with a very requested video to do some more Dungeons & Dragons stories.
And why not? We've got plenty.
We've got plenty, and we've known each other for 30 years. You moved into Vancouver, God, was that 1987?
1987, in the summer.
Unbelievable. And you and your brother were down the street, and we all hooked up, and we started like hanging out and playing video games, and then eventually playing the devil's game, Dungeons and Dragons.
Too satanic, John. Too satanic.
See, this guy remembers Mr. Shimizu, the art teacher.
I had an art class with him too.
And he brought up another point: is that he used to throw chalk at students as well.
Oh yeah. He wasn't shy about trying to get your attention by throwing stuff at you if you were not paying attention.
Can't do that anymore.
And we were all forced to take art, so there was plenty of us who weren't paying attention because we knew we had no future in art.
And you know, speaking of too satanic though, I remember getting this book, and this is going to sound really weird. I was super ill for like a week and a half, and my parents were like, "Oh, is there anything we can do to make you feel better?" And I'm like, "The Dungeon Master's Guide." I said that, and they went and got this for me, and I remember them handing it to me, and I thought it was like Satan's Bible, you know, because back then everybody thought like Dungeons & Dragons was very satanic, and then, no pun intended, and with a cover like that, it kind of alludes to a little bit of that, and that was cool.
Yeah.
But that's the mystery of it, right?
That was what edgy looked like in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, for sure. What was your first experience with Dungeons & Dragons like?
Wasn't until I moved into the neighborhood, and as you well know, I was next door neighbor to a family called the Catos, and there were two younger brothers, and they were very much into role-playing games, video games.
Board games, anything,
yeah, all that kind of stuff. It's the same family that got Phantasy Star first in the neighborhood.
Very cool
family.
family.
And I was a little bit on the young side for the whole crew, but you guys kind of welcomed me in, and I sort of joined in with what you guys were doing.
And what's funny about back then, I must have been around 14 years old. You were 12, but 2 years back then meant you were almost like an infantile child.
Right,
which even though you're not, but
it was a huge difference.
It was a big deal when you're 14 years old hanging out with a 12-year-old.
Yep.
But you were very older for your age, and you were very into the same things we were, so we invited you in, wanted to hang out.
And I loved playing role-playing games on computer, on television, even the NES at that point.
Yeah.
So this seemed like a natural fit.
And so here's another thing, is that the Catos were friends with Gordon, and Gordon was Rob's older brother.
Right.
And that's important to say that Gordon was kind of an asshole brother. He didn't let his younger brother play Dungeons & Dragons with us. So we didn't hang out with Rob till really
Although
years
at
later.
that point, Rob would have been, what, 9 years old or something?
Yeah, but I guess Rob had somewhat of an interest in things, but, you know.
He did.
I remember we'd be playing Dungeons & Dragons downstairs, and Rob would be upstairs, and his brother would be, "Get back up the stairs!"
Right,
you know,
right.
Having one of those moments.
Because, of course, when you're playing Dungeons & Dragons with a large enough group of people, you're at somebody's house one time, and then somebody else's house the next time. It just kind of rotated like that.
Yeah.
Although it tended to focus on the Cato's basement. That's where I remember most of my fond, early, formative years of Dungeons & Dragons.
They had the perfect nerd basement.
They
you
really
went down
did.
this spiraling staircase into this dark room with Commodore monitors and a wooden television. This is like how many years ago it is. And we'd all sit on the floor and play it. And I don't know, there was some kind of magic. It was also the age. I've always said that between like 12 and 14 years old is when you first like really discovering what you're really into, like Dungeons and Dragons and video games, and for younger guys, like you took it so seriously.
Right.
Yeah,
and the
it was
other
a very
big
serious
advantage
thing.
of their house was that nobody else in the family came downstairs very much.
It was great. Yeah.
It was a big house, and they kind of stayed upstairs, so we didn't really have to fight with anybody over the space. We just kind of took it over.
Yeah, because I think my parents would always be coming in the room, and your parents say, "Hey, so what's going on, guys? You join the Satan's clan yet?" But we want to talk about a few stories today, and a bunch of different little stories, and put them all together into one kind of episode. And what was one of the ones that you can remember from back then?
So we typically would take turns who would be the dungeon master and who would be the players, because everybody likes to play, and it wasn't really considered work.
But it is work.
It is work, and sometimes it's not as fun to be a DM as it is to be a player. So there was one particular time when we were rotating. It was Cato's turn to be the dungeon master.
Yeah.
And he had this genius idea, in his mind anyway, of how he could do sort of a a weird twist on how to engage with the players. Because normally you sit around a table or on the floor or something, and all of the players would hear everything the Dungeon Master had to say, and you guys were all kind of working together as a team.
Yeah.
So it was really bizarre. At one point, JD started to take individual players out of the room, and the rest of us would be sitting there kind of looking around thinking, okay, what's going on? So the lead-in was we were all traveling through this forest, and it became more and more foggy. So
the mist rolls in.
Yes, the
right?
fog rolls in.
That's what it was.
That was the classic line. And then he would start to take individual players, and he would go out of the room with these individual players, and then he'd come back, and he'd go out with somebody else, and they'd come back, and he'd go out with somebody else, and they'd come back.
Such a cumbersome job
because
thing he did.
once he'd gone through all the players, he'd go back and get the first player and take them out again. It was this sort of serialized...
It's just like, and it kind of taking the fun out of things where you're waiting, you're like, okay, well, what the fuck is going on here?
Right. And it kind of went on like this way for, like 30 minutes. And we were kind of getting tired of it. We're like, well, wait, why are we all sitting around here waiting? What are you doing?
Yeah.
And it kind of turned out that the whole idea, it seemed like kind of a cool idea at the time. He was trying to get the players to attack each other because we got lost in the fog. So he would tell you, oh, you see like a pointy hat just at the edge of the fog, or the glint of a weapon or something.
Yeah.
And he's like wanting the wizards to cast fireball or shoot arrows or something. He was trying
He's baiting the players into attacking each other.
He was trying to get us to attack each other. And it wasn't that we were not interested in attacking each other. We're, I would never attack my teammates. We just got so bored with the whole ping-ponging of things. We're like, JD, stop doing this. So he basically said, okay, you all find yourselves again in the forest, and then you carry on. And then we went on to whatever we were doing as a group sitting on the floor again.
He was an interesting DM, because I remember we were playing Top Secret, that spy kind of game, which is a RPG kind of thing where you roll dice and all that kind of stuff. And I remember him DMing a game, and we were so bored. He just wasn't a good DM. I remember that? We were like, JD, can something happen? We're so bored. And if your players are saying that to your team, you're doing it wrong.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, out about everybody's like, okay, so this guy comes out with a big bazooka, and it's like, oh, fuck off. That's just an add-on. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something intriguing to do.
I mean, I'm sure he had this great detailed picture and plan in his mind, but sometimes it just doesn't develop fast enough to keep the players' interest.
Yeah.
So a good DM can kind of react to how the players are reacting and move things along or change things up on the fly, but some people are just more dogmatically attached to the plan they've got, and they just keep trying to grind through it.
Yeah, and like if the players rebel against it, he's like, okay, I'll change it up. You should gotta stick to your guns.
Right.
No pun intended, and that's another D&D thing that I DM'd, and it's funny, I remember this, but you probably remember more details about how I did it. You guys went through like a portal. I was DMing, and you guys went through some portal, and based on what I said to the players is you find all these metallic objects, and you don't know what they are, and you pick them up and all that, and then you're like, what is it? It's like, it's got a trigger on it, and are you trying to describe something that the player has never seen? The player characters have never seen.
The human beings would know what it was,
yes.
But you're trying to be in character, and you wouldn't recognize what the item was.
Right. And this was a kind of an interesting... I remember I read this somewhere. It was like, I don't know if it was a D&D module, I read it in a Dragon magazine or something like that. But what it was that you guys had actually gone to a different dimension, a different time, and found guns.
Right. Like actual 6-shooters.
And so what was the deal about that? Like, I'm just trying to remember.
I don't remember why we went through the portal, but I remember vividly that when we came back into whatever the normal dimension we were supposed to be in.
The D&D dimension.
Right. We had these sort of precious icons. They're almost like a rod with charges.
That's kind of like what it was.
Yeah. And so there was no way to get ammunition. So you had 6 bullets in this gun, and they were seriously powerful things, but you were so scared about using it because you knew you'd never get it back. There was no way to recharge this. You couldn't get new bullets.
But what I found funny is everybody started shooting anything and everything, like, we should save it. No, but just use them.
Well, at that point, we were actually pretty high level, so we were fighting some kind of scary stuff, and when things got into a bit of a pinch, you pull out the big guns.
And
pun intended.
And that's the funny thing back then, is what I remember about Dungeons & Dragons is that everybody used to just end up arguing. We'd always break down, we'd spend days making characters, and then all of a sudden we got to playing D&D, and everybody, we'd say, finally get to play it, And all of a sudden, everybody started arguing, and everybody would argue and get pissed off, and some people would leave.
Right, and then that would basically stop the game, and then the next time you'd make new characters again and try again.
We're always making new characters.
We were always making new characters.
Yeah,
it was kind of ridiculous. Although, part of the fun is going through, like, the player's handbook and picking a new class and trying something different, even if it isn't going to last that long. And we did eventually get stable groups where we would play for longer durations. Yeah. And I remember certainly when you were a DM on a very regular basis, we had a consistent party.
And I tried to make it more fun and engaging, and I spent a lot of time trying to use my imagination to make an interesting story and to make it engaging and not the fog rolls in, you know?
Or just reading out of a module.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some great modules. There still are, but you kind of want that level of dynamic engagement with the players. You just want to be reading blurbs of text.
I always made up my own stories. I would look at a module and say, I like this, and take bits and make it my own. And then that way it's more fun to create the story as you go. But that's how you do it for the DM. The DM is much more a fun, enjoyable job than going, and that kind of gets into like Jim Smith. And I think I mentioned him before. I can't do the voice.
Yeah, don't. You'll never speak again.
He was a guy. How do you describe Jim Smith? He was a guy that lived just down the street from us. He came over occasionally, but he was so solemn and creepy and
I thought
intense.
He was like some kind of military robot or something.
He was like a Terminator.
Very short cropped hair and very monotone way of speaking.
But he talked very monotone. But he talked like this.
Right. It sounded like he was a teenager, but it sounded like he smoked 3 packs a day since he was a baby.
It was weird. So he talked very deep and just like, it was so weird. And then he DM'd a few games and it was just so bad.
Right. And unfortunately, the sort of monotonic way he talked I think it reflected the way he thought, too, because he was very
methodically boring like that.
Just...
Well, the joke is that we were walking down, or like some characters were walking down, and he goes, and some boulders came down, and some monster would show up, and he's like, you hit, you missed, you died, the game is over. It's over. I think I had Rob on and we talked about that guy. It was so funny.
It was definitely not an engaging game.
No.
And I don't think we ever had him as a DM again, thankfully.
Yeah, and so we played so many games, and it's interesting that so many games you forget about over time, but there's certain moments that you don't forget about. And I remember you joined up with Trevor Holness and another guy, Brad Berg. We'll get into him in a second. And you started playing. I'm already laughing about something I'm going to tell right here. Is that you started playing this, and this is awesome because I worked at a comic book store in 1987, West Coast Comics as it was called out here, and it's like sorting the comic box and stuff like that. And all the older guys, and they must have been like 19 or 20 years old. I was like 13 at that time. Were all playing MERP. You know, the Middle-earth role-playing game. This was a big deal. This is before the movie came out. This is straight from the books, not from the books to the movie to the game.
Right.
It was straight from the books. And so how did you get into the Middle-earth role-playing game? How did you start even playing it?
So when we first were playing with John and I and our neighbors with Dungeons & Dragons, we were in sort of elementary, junior high school. And as we got further into school, people went on to their own sort of separate things. So
I became like a drinker, smoker, skateboarder, and I stopped playing D&D at that point, which was unfortunate.
Yeah, you weren't around, so I played D&D for a few years with some of the people in my own grade. And one of the people in my grade was Trevor.
Yes.
And Trevor really liked to read the books. He liked the art. He didn't play Dungeons and Dragons with us, but he liked this stuff. He was looking for his way in.
And I think he liked obviously the Middle Earth, like the setting, the Tolkien's
right. And
world.
He didn't play Dungeons and Dragons, so he had no sort of muscle memory or skin in the game to go back to Dungeons and Dragons. He wanted to try something new.
Yeah.
And there was a friend of his as well named Brad.
Yes.
And he also wanted to play, and he was the one who started this, but he was quite a character.
I gotta tell this story. I know this is totally off base, but it's so bizarre. Brad, this is fucked up. I remember hanging out with him, and we were all like, even Swagger knew him as well, and he would wrap his legs behind his head, and he would drink, so like where his fucking ass and dick are in his face, but he could drink a drink. And we found out afterwards, and Brad had even admitted this, that he had sucked his own dick. I was like, I don't know if I was jealous or angry. I didn't know what to feel. I can
promise he never did that when we were playing MERP. I would have run the hell out of there.
That's what they call Murph, you know? Like, Murph.
I guess that's the noise he made. I don't know.
But I always remember Brad from that story, and he's an old person from a long time ago, this is like 1990.
Yeah.
You know, like doing that. It's so fucking funny.
I just remember the alcohol poisoning, stay in the hospital, because it prevented us from continuing the campaign. He got alcohol poisoning and we couldn't keep playing.
Oh, is that he from drinking one night?
Yeah.
I think I remember that.
He was in the hospital for a few days and he missed some of our scheduled playtimes. We had to wait for him to recover.
He just didn't fucking drink too much of his own semen and he's choking it out? Like, what the fuck's going on? Anyway, sorry. So I had to, when we were talking earlier on about this story, it's like, the guy who could suck his own dick. It's always that story. Anyways, sorry. We're back to the MERP. And there's a reason why I'm bringing this up. You guys had a really interesting altercation that happened in the game. I'll let you tell the story because I think I love this story and I want it documented because I love it so much.
So Trevor was playing a Dwarven Warrior and I was playing, I think, a Human Ranger. And Trevor was very aggressive, not only in the game, but out of the game. He was always the first into a fight, and he was always doing a lot of damage, and I was just pretty weak. I didn't get the rolls. I mean, a ranger isn't a big damage dealer anyway, but Trevor was always the one who kind of carried us through most of our combat events. And so he became the de facto leader of the party.
I started going to his head a little bit.
Oh, yeah. He started to actually, both in real life and in the game. In the game, his character would be like making fun of my character. Like we'd go to a bar and he'd pour the drink over my head or he'd kick out the stool out from underneath me. And, you know, he was being a bully in a freaking role-playing game. It's nuts. And there was one time, we'd been playing actually quite a while, certainly double-digit months at this point. And we had finished a campaign and we had come back to whatever the local tavern was and we were kind of decompressing, you know, selling whatever items, whatever it was we were doing. And Trevor wanted to get into a bar brawl. And he insisted that he was going to fight me, the ranger, and it was not with weapons, just with fists. And he was not going to pull any punches. He was going to roll the dice for real, and he was going to try and knock me out because that's what he wanted to do.
See, this is what it always broke down to in these games, fighting each other. It's
right,
ridiculous.
although usually we would be arguing in real life about something that happened cooperatively in the game. I don't remember any other time when players would actually deliberately be going after each other in the game.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, okay, I can't stop this. I'm not just going to stand there and let you, wail on me. So in MERP, it's not a D20. It's you roll based on a 0 to 100. So you roll 2d10, and those two numbers are like 0, 1 through 99. Actually, through 100.
Yeah.
If you roll double zeros, that was 100.
Yeah.
So, and on the charts for damage effects and things like that, this was a much more developed kind of critical hit model. So you didn't just do double damage or something like that. There were actually tables, depending on how high the roll was, that determined the kinds of effect you had.
So if you got in this roll, you'd be transferred to this kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So in theory, if you kept rolling 100, then you're basically like dealing a death blow. But it was very unlikely. It was highly unlikely. And like I was saying earlier, I was always getting pretty shitty rolls in this game. I was just not carrying my weight in combat.
Yeah.
So we set up and we start going toe to toe. And Brad's playing this straight. He's playing it like any other combat encounter. So you're rolling the dice the way you normally would. And the first attack I landed, he hit me. He probably nearly killed me with just the amount of damage he did. Regular attack, no critical or anything like that. And it was my chance to attack, and I hit him, and I rolled a 98 out of 100. And that 98 then set me up into a critical table, which was a different set of tables. So if you had, I don't even remember, it's been so long, like 1 to 10 was, you dislocate a finger or something like that.
10, you just like knock their head off.
Right,
Yeah.
but there was no killing blow unless you were way high up in the table. Like, I think you had to be 95 or higher for an actual death blow.
Yeah.
Everything else was just, more damage, because you're getting a critical,
Sure.
You're doing some more stuff. And on that table, I rolled double zeros. So I went from a 98 to a double zero. And in a bar brawl that he started, and I would love to look up what the actual wording is, but I can remember what anatomically happened. I punched him in the chin and drove his jawbone into his brain, and he collapsed dead.
I love that.
And I will never forget that wording, because all of that shit he'd been giving me, just this nit, 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 And then I put his freaking jaw through his brain.
That is amazing.
And that was it. And he ranted and raved and, oh, no, that's not what happened. And Brad's like, no, you wanted this, you pushed for it, and now you're dead. You can make a new character if you want. And I actually think he did make a dwarf that was exactly the same as the one he just lost.
Yeah.
But he was dead.
I love that story. I remember you telling me that story. Was that like 1990, 91, 92, 1990, I think, 91.
It was probably 91.
Yeah. I remember you telling me that story and I was like, that is amazing.
Yeah.
And I've wanted to that story cemented since then. We can finally do that today, which is amazing.
Documented evidence.
Yeah, he finally got what he deserved. That was so good. Yeah, and that's the thing. We have so many D&D stories. We'll end with a Swagger story.
Always. Why not?
Because Andrew obviously played with Swagger quite a bit of time. And I'll just end with this stupid story with Swagger is that you guys, I was DMing, and you had to go into this temple of, like, lizardmen, and it was really intense and all that kind of stuff, and you sneak your way in and all that.
And that's key, okay? We were trying to be stealthy.
Yes.
I mean, this is a lizardman temple, and there's overwhelming odds, so we didn't want to make a big deal of it.
You had to do it Metal Gear style.
Basically.
You wanted to. You didn't have to do anything, but
kept
you
looking
chose
for cardboard boxes and everything.
Yeah, and then obviously Swagger just runs in to start fucking hacking all these goddamn lizardmen up. And then the bit that killed me and killed us all, it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard in my life. He's like, okay, and so they're all dead, and he had done quite well, and, you know.
Now, I just want to insert something here. We were kind of giving him shit for this because we're like, no, stop reacting like this. We need to be stealthy. We're trying to sneak in here. Yes. Calm that shit down.
That's true.
So now he had his genius idea.
And this is his genius idea. He's like, okay, I want to cut off the lizardman's head. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, you roll. Of course, you're gonna do that. It's not. He's dead. He's gonna, you know, not do that. So he's like, I'm gonna peel off his skin, and I'm like, what? And he's all like, what are you doing? This is like, would be sacrilege if any more lizardmen come in and you've like defaced one of them. No pun intended. You're defacing him. Like, what are you doing? He's like, I want to take off his face and I want to wear it as a mask, and I want to pretend to be a lizard man and sneak into the ranks. And I'm like.
And in his mind, he thought this was perfectly normal. He just by wearing the face of a lizard man, everything else would somehow magically be lizard man. He'd have lizard man arm and tail and all the rest of this. And he's just this freaking leather face wearing a mask.
I know. And so they'd be like, welcome, brother. Like, where have you been? And he's like, snork, whatever fucking lizard man talk like, or whatever. Only Swagger could have such a stupid idea that was so damn funny, too.
Absolutely. And then he would defend it. What are you talking about? This is a great idea.
He's like, it's a great idea, yeah.
I'm just going to walk right up to them. What?
I know. Meanwhile, he was on his 5th beer at that point.
I'm sure that helped the decision-making process.
And everybody's got to remember, that's when Swagger played D&D, the alcohol... I mean, I've never seen a man drink so many beers so fast.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
He was definitely committed.
I remember at the end of some games, he'd be so drunk, and we'd be having to upgrade his character, and he's like, look at his sheet, he didn't know what the fuck he was.
He couldn't read it, so he'd have to have somebody, Brian or somebody, help him like allocate points and upgrade his character, because he was just not really there.
He's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, sure, fine.
What should I take?
Yeah.
And then he'd come back the next time we were playing, and he'd look at the sheet like he'd never seen it before. Because, frankly, he had never seen it before. And he'd wonder, okay, so what powers or something did I get?
I know.
And we'd have to explain what happened to him in the last game.
I know. So good. And you know what? We'll come back in the future. I know it's been a couple of years since we've done a D&D, a Dungeons & Dragons Memories episode, but we wanted to do it today, some Dungeons & Dragons stories for you guys. So anyways, guys, until next time.